Do you know that a human heart has a mass of around 300 grams and is about the size of the fist?
Wow, that's quite big. Is the heart also made up of similar kinds of muscles as blood vessels?
Actually not. The heart is made up of a special kind of muscle known as cardiac muscle.
Oops, how can I forget that? I know that cardiac muscles are only found in the heart.
Indeed, the cell surface membranes of cardiac muscle cells are very tightly joined together. This close contact between the muscle cells allows waves of electrical excitation to pass easily between them, which is a very important feature of the cardiac muscles.
Why is that feature so important?
We will learn about that later in this lesson. For the moment, let's learn about the internal structure of the heart. Can you explain what you remember?
I'd love to. If the heart is cut open vertically, the four chambers can be seen. The two chambers on the left of the heart are completely separated from the two chambers on the right by a wall of muscle called the septum. Additionally, blood cannot pass through the septum. However, if it does, then the condition is called a septal defect. So the only way of returning blood to the heart is either from the lungs or from different body parts. The upper chamber on each side of the heart is called an atrium, or sometimes an auricle. The two atria receive blood from the veins. The blood from the vena cava flows into the right atrium, while the blood from the pulmonary veins flows into the left atrium. The lower chambers are called the ventricles. Blood flows from the left atrium into the left ventricle, and from the right atrium to the right ventricle. The blood is then squeezed from the right ventricle to the pulmonary arteries and from the left ventricle to the aorta. The valves present between the ventricles and arteries are called semilunar valves or SL valves. The atria and ventricles also have valves between them, which are known as the atrioventricular valves or AV valves. The one on the left is the mitral or bicuspid valve, and the one on the right is the tricuspid valve.
Wonderful! I see that you have revised very well.
Thank you, teacher.
Do you know the walls of the ventricles are much thicker than those of the atria?
Wait, they are?
Yes. Don't you recall that the ventricles need to develop much more force when they contract to push the blood out of the heart and around the body? But the atria only need to push the blood to the ventricles. Also, the wall of the right ventricle is thinner than that of the left because the force produced is relatively small for the blood to get to the lungs, which are very close to the heart.
Yes, now I remember that. But teacher, I wonder what happens if blood flows to the lungs with high pressure?
Well, if blood with high pressure travels to the lungs, the tissue fluid would accumulate in the lungs, thus hampering the gas exchange.
Ah, I see. And the left ventricle has to develop sufficient force to supply blood to the rest of the body organs, except the lungs, right?
Indeed. The left ventricle must also be able to develop enough force to ensure that there is sufficient blood reaching organs like the brain and the kidneys to maintain their continuous function.
Finding this helpful? We have additional learning resources to offer. For Cambridge IGCSE and AS A-level subjects.
Our heart beats around 70 times per minute. The sequence of events leading to one heartbeat is called a cardiac cycle.
That's quite fast.
Indeed, this cardiac cycle comprises mainly three stages, namely atrial systole, ventricular systole, and ventricular diastole.
Whoa, those are pretty big words.
There, don't worry. Once you know the mechanism, they're not so hard. Have a look here. When the blood from the pulmonary veins and the vena cava enters the atria, both atria contract. This condition is called atrial systole. During the atrial systole, the pressure of the blood is higher in the atrium than in the ventricle, which forces the AV valve to open, pushing the blood into ventricles. about 0.1 seconds after the atria contract, the thick muscular walls of the ventricles squeeze inwards and increase the blood pressure. This is called a ventricular systole. As the pressure in the ventricles becomes greater than the pressure in the atria, the AV valves shut, preventing the backflow of the blood into the atria. Instead, the blood rushes upwards into the aorta and the pulmonary arteries, pushing open the SL valves in these vessels, letting the blood out of the heart. The ventricular systole lasts for about 0.3 seconds. Finally, the ventricles relax, and this stage is called the ventricular diastole. In this stage, the pressure in the ventricles drops. The SL valves close instantly after their cusps are filled with high-pressure blood to prevent the backflow of the blood into the ventricles. As the whole heart muscles relax, the blood from the veins flows into the two atria. In the atria, blood pressure is very low. Even so, the thin walls of the atria get swollen, providing very little resistance to the blood flow. Some of the blood even trickles downwards into the ventricles through the AV valves. This leads to the contraction of atrial muscle, which forcefully pushes the blood down into the ventricles, and the whole cycle repeats.
Register now for free.